There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Seán the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. So, it's a gray day, but I'm hoping I'm making up for it with my new blouse. Look at this. I wasn't even sure about it. It was so... didn't look quite like the picture on the website, but I'm going to go with it. Lindy said, Seán, are you sure that in addition to being a bibliomaniac, that you're not also a blouse maniac? As I told her, yeah, this one, and I debuted another one last night in my mid-year book freakout tag, and I have 2 more coming in the mail that were like $10 each or something from Old Navy was having a 50% off sale. Those are just t-shirts, but they're quite lovely t-shirts. Lindy said, Seán, are you sure you don't have a problem? It's like, well, but far worse problems I need support groups and 12-step programs for, but I think I'm okay in the blouse department. Hello, I'm in a great mood. I feel productive because I got 2 substantive videos that I'm quite pleased with out this week. One, my chat with my mum, and the other, the freak out tag. So that just put me in a great mood. Plus I've had a really excellent reading week. Counterintuitively, I'm going to share some, it's not bad news and it's not 100% sure, but it is not great news about Kenji, which is that there's probably going to be a significant delay. It's probably not going to get here in September. All I'm going to say about it is it's bureaucratic delays. It has nothing to do with his stuff or my stuff. It has to do with the immigration process. And there's been a bit of a glitch. I'm not going to go into details. And it's probably going to mean he's not going to get here in September, but fingers crossed that he'll get here by the end of the year. And we've had such good talks about it that it was almost like a renewal ceremony over video chat. That's like, okay, if it's going to be longer, we have to start communicating more in depth and more often because, you know, time zone difference. He's busy. I'm busy. Am I busy? We were having a video chat once every 2 weeks, and that's just not often enough. So I said, daily text messages. Absolutely. Minimum requirement, daily text messages and video chats that can be lighthearted or heavy-hearted twice a week. And we've been doing that. And so, you know, I can wait a little longer. There's no risk that it's going to be rejected or anything like that. It's just more hoops we have to jump through and sign this and apply for this and wait for this. So, disappointing, but I'm dealing with it okay. I don't have any other personal news. It's been just a great week. Here is the weekend review, and the last thing on the Patreon part of the weekend review is a book haul that I'm having trouble uploading to Patreon this morning. I don't know what the problem is, so you're going to get a sneak preview of it before anybody on Patreon sees it. In that Patreon book haul, I'm going to feature a one-page reading from Ellen Hawley's new novel, because it's such a fabulous opening to the novel, and it's a novel that needs your attention. So that part of it is going to be longer than usual, just because you need to hear the first page of this novel. Oh my God!
Can I tell a story about when you were 12 years old?
Oh, I guess so.
When you went to the library?
The witchcraft book?
Yeah. Seán ordered books from the library all the time. He was a very avid library user at that point. And the librarian said to me, I don't think he should be ordering these books. This one's on witchcraft. And I don't think he should be ordering. I don't think he should be reading about that. And I said to her, well, if he understands it and he gets something out of it, I don't think it's going to hurt him one bit. So she had to be quiet and let him take it home.
So if you've ever wondered why Seán the Book Maniac is so weird, it's because my mom was overly permissive. I just thought they were 2 of the most boring characters in all of queer literature, if not all of literature. It read like a Henry James novel, and if that floats your boat, you're going to like this. Thought maybe she could make enough of a living as a landlady to support her career as an artist. Her paintings are quite wonderful. I'll put 1 or 2 of them up at this point, just so you know what she was all about. And this is her memoir of that endeavor, The House of All Sorts. It was originally published in 1944, and she died in 1945. I'll read the first page. I love Ellen Hawley's writing. Toward the end of the first real conversation we ever had, David Freund asked if I still thought I could change the world. Still, he said, as if we'd been arguing about this for years. Although before Josie, my grandmother, his sister, died, we'd never seen each other. She'd been the stopper in the family bottle, keeping him neatly contained and out of our lives. And now that she was gone, he was pouring into my life. Already he thought he knew what was inside my head, which pissed me off, particularly since he was right. I'd seen him twice since Josie's death, and we hadn't managed much in the way of conversation either time. Here I was, though, sitting stiffly on his brocade sofa, trying not to spill the coffee he'd given me. I quoted Margaret Mead at him. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." It felt odd saying "indeed" out loud, but the quote demanded that kind of formality. Besides, it matched his furniture. He blew a stream of air through his lips, as if it was exactly the sort of answer he'd expected. I told myself I was a stand-in for the version of Josie he carried in his memory, and the whole scene seemed as natural as it did ridiculous. I'd borrowed my quotation from a battered poster still taped to Josie's basement door, so in a sense, it was her answer. Oh my God, that's fantastic! Oh, I was already planning to read this next month, and I absolutely must get to it next month. So yes, it's apparently this is smoke from the forest fires. I can smell it, but I can smell it very faintly, and I actually kind of like the smell of the forest fires. The forest fires are bad news, but it doesn't bother me. I've got lung problems and stuff, and it doesn't. I can't notice that it bothers me. It bothers my dad a lot. Hence the gray skies, and hence my very sunny blouse for you all. Okay, I've had a really great reading week. I've finished 3 books. I'm going to check in with my new format, checking in on new books that I'm well into. I'm going to check in on 3 of those. And I'm starting a ridiculous number of books that I'll tell you about at the end of the video. So, the first book that I finished was on Monday, and that was this fabulous biography of J.L. Carr. The Last Englishman, The Life of J.L. Carr by Byron Rogers. This was a buddy read with Heidi of My Reading Life, and we just loved it. It's one of the best literary biographies I've read, and Heidi had a similarly superlative reaction to it. J.L. Carr was such an odd duck. He's the author of A Month in the Country. It was published in 1980. It's one of the best novels. It's one of the best works of fiction I've ever read. I am not particularly interested in reading much of his other stuff. Every novel was autobiographical, and every novel was so completely different from the others. Reading this biography did pique my interest, Heidi's and my interest, in trying 1 or 2 of the other ones, so we're going to read one of them next year. But what a fascinating life this guy had. He was an odd duck. Nobody, not even his wife, who after 40 or 50 years of marriage said to a friend, "I don't really know my husband very well." He was very kind of secretive. He kept everybody compartmentalized. I don't think he had any dark secrets, or at least the biographer didn't discover them. But he wouldn't be the kind of person that you'd comfortably sit down and spend an evening shooting the shit with. He's a bit uptight, had his finger in so many different pies, being a publisher, an author, a teacher, local historian, an artist really, created these fabulous maps of all the counties of England. And his son is still operating that press. What is it called? Quince Street Press or something like that? Quince Tree Press. His son Bob Carr is still running it, so you can buy. I'll put a link to that website it's a little bit clunky website, but you can still buy stuff, all of Carr's novels and many of his maps and little other chapbooks and stuff he's done. And I plan to stock up. You can also buy a hardcover copy of this for £15. I got mine used, and I don't know how easy it is to find otherwise, but it is an absolutely incredible biography. For example, J.L. Carr, as a young man, he decided to do a teaching exchange and went to either North Dakota or South Dakota. This was 1938 and 1939. And, he just stuck out like a sore thumb, and everybody ultimately became beguiled with him, if not ever comfortable enough to spend an evening drinking a beer with him. The impact he had on that small redneck community, being there just for a year, and he's written one of his novels based on that experience. And then he made his way back to England as World War II was breaking out. And he's the kind of person that he's so preoccupied with what he's doing personally, that things like that slip him by. So he went on a round-the-world tour as the war was breaking out and finally started reading the newspapers when people were acting strange around him. And it was a harrowing trip to get back to England. And then he did serve in World War II, and he's written a novel about that. What a fascinating man. This was exquisite. All 3 of these books are 5-star reads because I bail on everything else, right? There's a method to my madness. Next is this queer memoir, All Down Darkness Wide by Seán Hewitt. Seán Hewitt is a British writer and scholar, poet. I believe one of his parents is Irish, but he considers himself British and grew up in Liverpool. But he now is a professor at Trinity College in Dublin. This is a really difficult book to talk about because it hit me so personally, and I'm not going to do a confessional review here, but this spoke so deeply to me as a gay man. The main focus of the memoir, but there are other foci for sure. Did I pronounce foci right? Am I using it right? Was his first serious relationship with a Swedish guy that was just an adorable guy that he met while traveling in South America, and they were together for several years. And a year or 2 into their relationship, when they were living together in Sweden, in Gothenburg, I believe, same city that's the setting for my all-time favorite book this year, Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren, his lover, what is his name? Elias, suddenly descends into clinical depression and becomes suicidal. And that, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it just changed everything about their relationship, and ultimately a few years later they mutually agreed that it was time to part. And so it was heartbreaking because they had had such a fabulously romantic and soulful connection, and there may have been other factors that we don't know about, but Elias's descent into the dark bleakness of depression, of a suicidal depression, the relationship floundered. So that is a big part of what Seán Hewitt is writing, but he's also writing about something that really touched me deeply, because I can't relate to that part. I have never had a partner that, had a serious mental illness. But what I did relate to was the way he enlarged his memoir to talk about other, and in fact this enlargement happens in the first chapter, to talk about a circle of gay men, many of whom died young, struggled with addiction, struggled with mental health issues. And so part of his inquiry, which he goes about in kind of in an idiosyncratic, highly literary, and deeply affecting way, is what is it that befalls so many of us queer men, that our lives are foreshortened or marred by such struggles. And I really relate to that because, and I'm not going to make a big story about this, but earlier this year, an old gay friend of mine died, and we don't know what it was, but he was younger than me, a couple of years at least, a few years younger than me, and we had been really close friends in the 80s. We'd grown apart, and that's fine, but nobody knows for sure now whether it was suicide or a drug overdose, but he's gone. And that set off similar kind of soul searching for me and among my gay friends. Like, what is it that fucks so many of us up? And the way that Seán Hewitt explores that through his own personal experience and through the writing of a poet that he was writing, I think, his dissertation on, who I had kind of forgotten was probably gay. Is it Gerard Manley Hopkins? And he's writing his dissertation on him, and the way that he interweaves what he's experiencing personally and what was quite obviously Hopkins's struggle with his own queerness was incredibly powerful. It's gotten me interested in Hopkins for the first time since I studied the poem that has that line, something something shook foil, in university. And I didn't remember that he was a closet case, or that many people think he was. Certainly the way that Seán Hewitt writes about him, it's very convincing and just absolutely fascinating. And then also when he's living in Sweden with Elias, he becomes really interested in a famous Swedish poet, a lesbian poet, who I think I'm have learned the pronunciation of her name, Karen Boyer, who committed suicide as a young woman. And her poetry is excerpted here, and I've gotten very interested in her. An incredibly deep, very personal book for any gay man, I think, or for any gay man who relates to stuff that I've just been talking about for the last 5 minutes. And I thought it could have been tightened up a little bit, or there were some parts of it that I was less interested in. He is a recovering Catholic, and so there's a lot about religion and about what appeals to him about spirituality in a wider sense and what he has let go of that I was left a little bit cold by. And there is a sense, I think, in places of a little bit of overwriting and a little bit of overwrought stuff. Very minor. It was there. And this is one of the most incredible queer memoirs I've ever read. I recommend it with those tiny little, what's the word, caveat? Just amazing. Well, if you didn't think that my check-in on what I finished was heavy enough, stay tuned. This is the book I finished just about an hour ago. And this novella, it's autofiction, or it's a novel, but not really, was an amazing work of literature. And that is An Ideal Presence, a novel by Eduardo Berti, translated from the French by Daniel Levin-Becker. I got it from the library. I will definitely be getting my own copy. Eduardo Berti is an Argentinian novelist. He's been living in France for some years. I believe this is the first book he's written in French. His previous stuff was in Spanish. And this is based on his experience he was invited as a guest to the palliative care department for Rouen, France, if I'm pronouncing that French city's name. I don't think I am pronouncing it correctly. My French pronunciation is just ridiculously bad. And he observed and had conversations with all of the staff in the palliative care department, from the janitors to the doctors, the nurses, the nursing assistants, the social workers, and wrote this novel based on those conversations. So I think there's a fancy word that's gone out of my head for this style of fiction, narrative nonfiction that's called a novel. It's not just autofictional. He's actually not a character in it. These are transcriptions that I'm assuming he has shaped so that we're not getting word for word, but we're getting a novelist's version of the transcriptions. And it was just incredibly powerful. So it reminded me of, and I meant to look this up, so can I find it? There was a book that was a bit similar by a AIDS care worker, a white lesbian American writer, that I had an autograph copy and I don't have it anymore. I'm kicking myself that I let it go without reading it. And then Greg has put up some powerful videos about it. I got another copy and read it, and it affected me just as deeply as it did Greg. That was about one person and their experience as a kind of hospice worker. Not hospice, home care. He was visiting, being an AIDS buddy, which is something that I did when I was much younger. And it's just incredibly powerful. In this case, the author is not in the story, but is being addressed by all these people. And oh my God, the tone shifts from light to heavy. Most of them are like short little anecdotes. As I talked about in the video with Mum, I have been kind of drawn to narratives of death since I was very small. And so this really, I really locked on to this and was just transported by all the things. So for example, there are stories and anecdotes about mistakes staff have made. Staff getting too involved in the patients' lives. Getting too emotionally attached. Being too detached. Facilitating family healing of family feuds and family members not speaking to each other. Where there's at least 2 stories about breaches in families that were not healed. And those were particularly heartbreaking to read. And what it felt like to give a dying woman a makeover, dolling her all up, arranging for a gay wedding in the dying man's room with his homophobic parents standing off in the corner glowering. And the title, a doctor says, and it's right near the end, the doctor. I'll read this. His daughter became a doctor, and this little anecdote, this first-person account, is about him growing into being a real doctor. The her here is his daughter. I tell her often that others get it wrong when they say a good caregiver needs to find an ideal distance from their patients. I tell her that what we have to find is the ideal presence, and that's far from just a simple play on words. I also tell her that as soon as I understood that, I became a doctor worthy of the word. So that is the title, An Ideal Presence. Absolutely incredible. All right, so that's what I finished. So I'm going to check in on 3 books. Let me start with the one that's on audio so I don't forget. And that is Matterhorn by Karl Marlantes. I have the ebook through Hoopla, and I have the audiobook through Libby, and I'm mostly just listening. The audio narrator is Bronson Pinchot, who is one of the very best audio narrators. And the thing that's so incredible about this, it's a story of American soldiers during the Vietnam War in Vietnam. Matterhorn is the name of the mountain in Vietnam, and of course the army, they create their own names for everything. So Matterhorn is in Sweden, obviously, or Switzerland, or wherever the hell it is, but this mountain in Vietnam they've named as Matterhorn. And the third-person account, it's mainly, or maybe even completely, limited to one of the kind of mid-level officers, and through his eyes we see everybody in the I'm terrible with army words, in the battalion, in the group of soldiers, and the characters are so incredibly richly drawn. So I started to say the audiobook is absolutely incredible because Pinchot, in a way that was completely convincing to me, does every regional and American accent and Black American accent. It's just incredible. You just feel like you're right there. I don't remember, and I may not have been paying attention, or it may not have come up in much of what I've read on audiobook, but in many cases, because they think the other bad guys, they weren't bad guys, but the North Vietnamese were just waiting for a sound, and they're crouching in the trees or whatever and whispering, and the way he whispers the dialogue, it just heightens the tension. It is an incredibly rich experience so far. I'm I don't know, a significant chunk into it, but it's a 12-hour audiobook, and I think as a work of war fiction, and I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, I am participating quite avidly in the debut readathon this month, War on BookTube, and this is one of the highlights. Karl Marlantes was a Vietnam vet, and so I'm imagining that much of what I'm reading is quite autobiographical. And, you know, is there anybody alive that isn't a Bush or something that thinks the Vietnam War was a good idea, or that America had any right to be there? Of course not, and that's actually part of the story. And it wasn't, I don't think it was the soldiers that I'm reading about. It wasn't their fault. They didn't get the U.S. into Vietnam, into this immoral war. And I'm just falling in love with them. Yeah, it's really, really good. Holy smokes. I am now I'm exactly 53 pages into this novel that is going to be a pseudo buddy read with Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, at the behest of Nell of Book Hunt, formerly of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, E.L. Doctorow's The Book of Daniel, which is Nell's favorite novel, and Scott had never read it, and I had never read it, and here we are reading it. We're going to discuss it probably early August. I'm loving it. I don't have any reservations. It's a very different, I've never read anything by E.L. Doctorow, and I'm finding it a challenging read because I'm kind of nervous about how the conversation, Scott, I'm kind of nervous about how the conversation is going to go, because I am a lefty who thinks communism is incredibly evil, with no exceptions. And this is based on the Rosenberg, Ethel and, I don't remember what his name was. Ethel and somebody, Rosenberg. that were executed for spying for the Soviet Union. There was some debate at the time that whether it was trumped up charges and that they weren't actually spies. It's come out now. They were spies. I don't necessarily think they should have been executed, but spying for the Soviet Union was a crime, and I support that because communism is evil. And so I'm looking forward to what kind of a discussion Scott. I don't think Scott's a communist, but I know Nell is. And so it's going to be an interesting discussion. This is about the children that were left behind, a fictionalized account of the Rosenberg children. Daniel is the son and his sister, Susan maybe? And it's so good. The writing is incredible. Doctorow is doing something really fascinating that I don't know how to describe very well yet with point of view. It is a first-person account, but yet it jumps from third person limited, to first person, all centered on Daniel. And I don't know what he's doing with that, but it's working for me in a way that I don't know how to describe. Be interesting. I'm looking forward to picking the gunpowder and fiction and plot duo about that. I think Nell's going to be in on our chat. I'm really enjoying this. I think I am enjoying it. I'm finding it really intellectually stimulating, and the writing is incredible. And finally, I am 40 pages into this historical novel, Cecily, by Annie Garthwaite. This is also for War on Booktube. Cecily Neville was a early 15th century noblewoman, granddaughter or great-granddaughter of one of the early kings, John III, I want to say, but I've already am moving into what I'm finding a real challenge with this book is that I'm not that familiar with the history. It's at the tail end of the 100 Years' War, and we'll go up to the beginning, or I don't know how far into the War of the Roses. And I studied that, I guess, in high school. I have no memory of that, and I would have studied it in my first year survey history course, but I don't remember anything about it. So I'm doing a heck of a lot of Google reading, and I'm having a good time, but it's making it feel like more work than it should, because it's actually a really well-written novel. This came to my attention because I had a bite-sized book chat with a subscriber. I'll put the link to that in the show notes, and it's kind of reminiscent of Hilary Mantel. Certainly really well written, and the characters are quite vibrant. Cecily was tough as nails, and I think as the story progresses, we're going to see her kind of ignoring the gender norms of the 15th century and making a lot of things happen that women weren't typically making happen in that era. So she's quite a fascinating protagonist. In here, she's a young, newly pregnant, where I'm at on page 40. She's just become pregnant. Her husband is Richard, who was, again, I just get tripped up here, Richard Plantagenet, and he ends up becoming a pivotal figure in British history of this era. That hasn't really happened yet. Richard Plantagenet, who in the opening chapters becomes the Duke of York. So Cecily is the Duchess of York, and they are, really on a first-name basis. I don't think they were on a first-name basis, but they were really in the inner circle of the king, who was a boy king. I think he was about 12 when Joan of Arc was burned at the stake, which is the opening chapter and very vividly described. It's really good. It's giving me a fabulous headache because I'm having to Google everything. But, a certain kind of reader wouldn't Google everything, and maybe they'd have a even better experience. But I'm having a fabulous experience, and I have a headache. So now let me talk about what I'm going to start. I'm going to start 5 books, even though I only finished 3. I have no bails to tell you about, by the way. I guess I need to bail on 2 to keep things checked. But Heidi and I are going to start our buddy read of True Biz by Sara Nović. Oh, let me take this off. That price tag didn't peel off very well. She's a deaf writer, and this is a novel with deaf characters that was put very emphatically on my radar when the lovely Bookloopers ladies came on Bite Size Book Chats. I think it was Emily that had read it, or that talked about it. And it's very much about sign language and all the deaf politics and all that. And it sounds absolutely incredible. Heidi and our buddy read will start on Monday. First check-in is on Monday, so I've got some reading cut out for me, although we're only doing about 60 pages a week, which is kind of nice. It's time for me to get started on the next book by Marian Engel. Marian Engel is the author most famously of the novella Bear, which is one of the most important and best works of Canadian literature. And I did a long-form chat with Dorian and James about Bear, and then we decided, let's keep reading a book of hers a year. Marian Engel died in her early 50s. She was 51. She died in 1985. And we did another of her novels, or novellas, last year. And now we're trying her last book, a collection of short stories, The Tattooed Women. And this is the copy that just came in the mail. We are having this Zoom chat, I think, in early September or sometime in September. And I want to read these at a leisurely pace. I also am thrilled to tell you that we have a new panelist, a new reader joining the discussion, and that is Chris of the Book Cougars, because she read Bear and loved it, and I said, join our annual Marian Engel book club, and she has, and we're all going to be discussing The Tattooed Women. This might be the last book from my War on BookTube TBR that I have time to fit in, but maybe not. This is this Czech novel, Mendelssohn on the Roof by Jiří Weil, translated from the Czech by Marie Wynn. Really looking forward to getting started on that. And I have been wanting to get this started, and I figured there's no time like the present, Seán. A novel by a Nigerian-Canadian writer who lives in Saskatoon. I went to the book launch, and the title is Leave My Bones in Saskatoon by Michael Afenfia. It was one of the most dramatic and fabulous book launches I've ever been to, and I've been to hundreds. And I bought the novel, got it signed, and I already told Michael Afenfia that I want to have him on my channel once I've had a chance to read it, so it is time to get started. This is a novel about a Nigerian family escaping the violence in that part of Nigeria where they lived and coming to Canada and ending up in Saskatoon of all places. So it's going to be a really interesting story for me to read, I think. And finally, Joe Smith and I were supposed to be buddy reading, I didn't bring it, but The War and All That It Holds by Alexander Heman. And she's still waiting for her library copy. That's the guy that's got it signed out now hasn't returned it on time. So we were going to start it in the first week of July and now the second week. So we've decided we're not going to buddy read it. I'm going to continue reading mine and she's going to read hers when she can, but we're not going to try and buddy read it. So instead, we have moved up a book that we had on our buddy read list. I had never heard of this writer, and he came to my attention via a tweet. Editing Seán here, and I just went to look the tweet up now that I'm back at home, and it's been deleted by the user, and I have no idea what it was about the tweet's reference to this author that intrigued me, but you'll have to take my word for it. It just piqued my interest. I looked up the Wikipedia entry for the guy and found out that this is his most famous novel. His name is B.S. Johnson, who died in 1973, and this was, I think, even published posthumously. It was his last novel, I'm pretty sure. Christine Malry's Own Double Entry by B.S. Johnson. It sounds very weird. Christie Malry, the protagonist, is a young accounts clerk in London, and he's a double-entry bookkeeper. And he is feeling hard done by all the people that have treated him badly, or the institutions or whatever that have treated him badly, and so he starts keeping a moral double-entry bookkeeping system, and hence the novel. It's 200 pages. Joe and I are going to check in on the first half next Thursday and the second half thereafter. We got Women in Translation books to buddy read in August, and I'm excited to give this writer. Have you ever heard of B.S. Johnson? I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know, but I love giving obscure writers that I've never heard of a try. All right, that is my Friday report. Well, now that I've told you all that, I am so stimulated that I feel like, I need a cigarette. I haven't had a cigarette in about 10 years. I need something. Maybe I need to have a cold shower. I'm all hot and bothered by all these fabulous books. Thanks for watching.